A long time ago, on a comics page far, far away.
Welcome to Panel Up, your monthly pop culture panel. I'm John Campbell.
I am Mike Gorgone.
Oh, Gorgone, it's the show within a show that's the old show we used to do that's a brand new show at the same time.
I'm a show pretending to be a show dressed as another show.
That's it. Every time I think about this, I think about that same line. Yeah. Yes, this is for those who miss the old format of us talking about anything and everything in pop culture. This is that show. And it's a nice break for us as we get to leave the 1970s briefly and talk about some things that are happening in the world now.
Or in the near future, though thanks to podcast time travel, it's already happened for us, the late 1990s as well.
Yeah, we've done those, but we're coming to those. Man, this show hurts my brain. This is like a Nolan movie all of a sudden.
We're performing a temporal pincer movement.
Yes, man. Gorgone, how you doing? We don't often do the show on a we sort of record in batches these episodes, so I don't get to ask you enough. How you doing?
How am I doing? Doing pretty good, John, you know. Still doing what I do, working on the weekdays and podcasting on the weekends, while also trying to, I don't know if I've actually, talked about this on the show, but, I'm trying to design and publish a tabletop RPG book, and that's an ongoing project that's still happening.
At least come up, right? Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yeah, that's a whole thing that I know nothing about that world, so.
Well, with today's Uber topic, you know a little bit more about it now, actually.
Yeah, I do, and I feel like I do, but I don't know that I do now. Right, because we'll eventually get to our review of Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. Just everybody calm down.
Yeah. But yeah, doing pretty good. How about you?
I'm doing all right. You know, I'm podcasting all the time, man, as you know, and thanks for setting me up without even knowing it for this plug about all the awesome content we have here on the Punch Up Entertainment Network and on our
Patreon. Can't stop yourself.
Page.
I ask you a reasonable personal thing about your friendship, and you're
and I'm like, well, plug the
content.
Stuff. Plug the content, personal stuff. I'm made of content, sir. No, but yeah, I'm doing a lot of stuff, and if I wasn't a patron of our show, I would feel like I'm missing out because we got a lot of cool stuff over there. But yeah, we've been recording. Man, I am ever on brand.
Maybe a little too much, John.
Yeah, no. I'm just talking to people in my everyday life and going like, have you heard my podcast?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we do a show about that on the network.
I was just saying it on the podcast the other day.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you've gotten to this point where you do enough of them. I certainly do enough of them where I'm like, I don't know if I said that on mic or not. I no longer know what I say to people in reality or on the show.
Yeah, I was literally just talking to a friend of all of the shows and Matcom cast member Elliot Lewis last night. He was like, did I tell you this when we were recording or as a friend? I don't remember.
Which I think is good for the show, and it shows how casual and much we are like ourselves on the show, but bad for me as a human being. Yeah. Objectively. But no, I've been, well, as we're going to get into now, I've been watching a lot of stuff, and this, you know, once again, this show kind of stems from us going, well, we can't fully abandon this because there's a million things and we have to talk about some of them.
What this does is sort of stop us from going on wild, completely unrelated tangents in our Star Wars coverage that would otherwise destabilize the through line of that show that we've done specifically so we have a through line.
Yes, yeah. Boy, and by the way, on that, I hope you're enjoying the 50-some minute episodes, folks, as opposed to some of the 2+ hour rants that we used to go on. Which is reserved for all of the other shows we do.
We're trying to keep it under the length of a feature film. Yeah.
Cool. Good luck. Yeah, sometimes, man. Look, this is coming from a guy who once hosted a 4-hour discussion of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. So,
And you're talking to the guy who did 100+ episodes of 4+ hour episodes of season 1 of Matcom. So yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's. I mean, there was literally a conversation the other day between Action Shelf co-host Michael Lissam and myself about, do these need more than minutes long?
Were you talking about the movies or the podcast, John?
Why can't it be both? The movies we definitively know should never be more than 90 minutes long. But the show, just the show, need to be that long. But yeah, Gorgone, what have you been consuming, watching, in your life these days?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my time has been devoted to video games, quite honestly. Like
Yeah.
if I'm not watching or reading something for the show, I'm usually doing something that is completely divorced from podcasting, which at the moment is video games.
What's out there now that's a little bit it's interesting, the hierarchy of things. Video games are, I love them, but they're always kind of the last on my list. So what's out there right now that you're really digging in the video game world?
There's a lot of things that like are coming out or have just come out that I'm like, ooh, I need to get to that. Let's just play a game that was released 10 years ago instead.
This is me with any kind of streaming content where it's like, what's this? I'm just watching Deep Space Nine again.
Yeah. Well, I'm also like on my like fifth or sixth rewatch of Star Trek Lower Decks because a bunch of announcements just came out about that.
Yeah.
We know that it got renewed for 2 new seasons. The 4th season is going to be starting up this summer, and it's already gotten renewed for a 5th season.
Yeah.
And this season they're going to have a crossover event with Strange New Worlds, and I'm still a little raised eyebrowy about how that's going to work.
Yeah, they had announced that back at Star Trek Day, or like the loose, like, we're gonna be doing something a while back, and everybody's kind of like, I understand what and at the same time, Strange New Worlds also got picked up for 2 more seasons.
Right, yeah.
Well, which is great because those are the 2 best Star Trek things going right now, are Strange New Worlds and and beloved Picard, but we'll get there someday. Maybe
But
next
yeah,
month.
in terms of what video games I'm actually playing, I guess let me dive into a little bit of a moral morass here for a moment.
Ooh, alliteration and big words.
I don't know how much you or our listeners know about everything that has happened with Activision Blizzard over the last few years.
Not being like fully in that world loosely. Yeah, like once again, sort of in seeing headlines or hearing you or other video game friends of mine talk about stuff. So loosely.
Long story short, acclaimed video game developer Blizzard has, like a lot of larger companies these days, had a lot of their, let's call it dirty laundry, aired to the public via people coming out and talking about their experiences, whether it be in the forms of sexual assault or how they were mistreated at their job due to their gender, their race, all of the above, and like really revealing the scummy underbelly of some of these larger companies, and Blizzard Entertainment was no exception to that. And a lot of the people responsible for that have moved on, but a few key players are still in charge of the company, and it sort of makes it difficult to engage with content that's still being released by them without, like, I don't know, ignoring some of the moral implications therein in terms of supporting a company that can, and maybe still does, engender that sort of behavior. And this is like something that a conscientious consumer, quote unquote, has to grapple with every day, right? Like, I know Walmart's an evil company, but can I afford to shop anywhere else? I know Amazon is awful and like makes their warehouse employees pee in bottles, but damn it, that 2-day shipping. And it's like, where do you draw that line, right?
Well, because it is sort of, I mean, there is a thing where it's like the moral outrage versus the, like, do I then actively damage my own financial standing or go out of my way to, like, backbreakingly go to tiny little stores? I mean, like, there is sort of a thing where it's like, at what point are you hurting yourself to take on a system that your involvement in, what doesn't really matter?
Sure, and it becomes even murkier when you start talking about employees who aren't directly involved with any of that stuff, who still have
Right.
to make their living at these companies. And
That's a
where
whole
video
other.
games are concerned, that's a huge deal because when you talk about all of the artists and designers and coders and playtesters who make their living working for these larger companies and have nothing to do with the environments of abuse and like shitty behavior that is going on at some of these companies, are you choosing to withdraw support to them, thus endangering their jobs in order to take a moral stance against the company at large and some
It's
of the
always that
higher ups
thing
that
too.
exist within it?
Like when people rattle their fists at major multimedia conglomerates and stuff like that, or go "fuck you, Disney," right, and stuff
Right.
like that. Like, well, you're yelling at the five people in a boardroom when actuality there's, thousands of people who are just artists working for a company,
Right.
and you have certainly nothing against them.
Right. And that becomes easier when you have like a lead actor or director or writer who is specifically shitty, and so you can say, no good, very bad, don't support their work. And we'll talk
Right.
about this a little bit with Dungeons and Dragons as well later. There was a lot of talk in the last couple of months about whether or not fans would be boycotting this movie.
Hmm.
But I say all of this as preamble to basically say that over the weekend there was a open beta for Diablo 4 that I participated in. The moral loophole I jumped through in my head being that, well, it's a free beta. I'm not actually giving them any money. What I am exchanging is basically game information about how they can make a better product upon its release. Now, whether or not I'm going to be purchasing this product upon its release, probably not. I'm pretty sure I scratched this itch when I played it over the weekend.
Okay.
That that said, it's a really good Diablo game. Like it played really well, and like if you're a fan of Diablo 2 and even into the later versions of Diablo 3 once they'd patched it up a bit, like it plays really smoothly. It looked like a lot of fun. I played it on a PS5. It was really fun. But this whole time I played that game, I couldn't help but like think about where we draw those lines of moral compromise. Obviously, it's not necessarily as clear cut as something, say, like Harry Potter, where everything related to that brand impacts J.K. Rowling in some way, and she is the person that those with a moral dislike of her would oppose. So it's a
Hmm.
little more clear cut. It's like, okay, any dollar spent on Harry Potter goes to J.K. Rowling. Does every dollar spent on Diablo 4 go to Bobby Kotick, the CEO of Activision Blizzard, who's kind of a jerkwad, and whose removal would precipitate maybe a flood of people back into that fold?
Mm. Yeah, sure, yeah.
I don't know. And it's one of those questions I wrestle with, and some other gamers I've talked to who like roll their eyes at that and kind of just say like, who cares? Like,
Hmm.
what if you dislike the irreputable behavior of these individuals who control these properties? Is it a moral imperative upon you to oppose those things and deprive yourself of enjoyment of something you might otherwise really love, whether it be Diablo, whether it be Hogwarts Legacy, whether it be ordering something for 2 day shipping on Amazon,
Hmm.
and instead going to a local co-op? Like, I don't know. It's just one of those things you kind of
There,
have
I
to.
mean,
You can either
yeah.
choose to wrestle with or not, and a lot of people don't. And that's, look, if you don't want to burden yourself with those sorts of implications, that's totally fair. I
Well, because
absolutely understand that.
and the other thing too is you talk about, how do you weigh that, and then two, how do you implement that? Because as we're talking about too, where does that line draw? Because you could just never do anything or consume anything because you can always find the bad actors or people ultimately at the top who profit from all this, right? And you've got to find that line for yourself is what I'm saying, because you can either be completely ignorant, which I think is problematic, being ignorant. Now, whether you do anything about that, or you can be
Being
some
willfully ignorant.
willfully ignorant, or you can drive yourself insane, ever trying to find a perfectly moral thing that just doesn't exist in the capitalist society.
You could be
And
the Henry
some,
Winkler character from the last season of The Good Place, right? Where
right,
he's
yeah,
like trying to absolutely remove himself from the karmic equation by
yeah,
living almost like an aesthetic lifestyle.
right, and you're just like that's just not practical.
one would think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate. Somewhere, the flow of money will get to people who are doing things that are probably against your morals. So it is, like I said, I think it's all about finding that line, and also I think key to all of this is maybe not then turning it around and going like, and you should be doing what I'm doing
Right.
too.
And that's the thing is I because there are certain lines I'm willing to cross, like I'm not going to stop using Amazon to purchase batteries. Like
Right. It
it's
just
just
once again that would be irresponsible in your own life to
for
do
my
that for.
own personal finances, right?
Yes, exactly. That's sort of the thing that it comes to as well. And I'm all aboard the Amazon train because they've done it. I mean, it's one of those things where I go like they kind of have taken over the world. I mean, once again, I'm not like if somebody could create something that could do the same stuff and isn't morally reprehensible, I'd be all on board for that. But like, it's once again, it's sort of me going like, they are where I get most of my stuff. I don't know what
And
to tell you.
and that's the depressing part, right? Because
Yeah.
if you stop to think about it for any length of time, you're admitting a level of defeat for the sake of ease and your own mental health and your own financial health, and
Hmm.
that can feel really bad.
It
And
can,
so
yeah.
you get to a place where you almost subconsciously stop thinking about it. And
Right.
it's only when you stop to realize that you've made yourself stop thinking about it that you feel bad about it. And
Right.
it goes into this whole psychological loop that
Well, and
I'm not a psychologist. I don't want to spend time on this podcast explaining like
you
deep
expressly
cycles
told
of
me
that
you
sort
were
of
a
thing.
psychologist when we started this show. So how dare you?
I misled you, John. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Oh, I see. That PhD was fake. No, I think that's it exactly. And it is sort of like also even the thinking about it. How much do you let that damage your day, right? Because it's like the other bad thing is to be buying stuff on Amazon and then also like beating yourself up for I can't believe I did this.
Right.
I am a monster. You just go like that's not helping anybody.
Right. So when I spent the weekend playing the open beta of Diablo 4, that was
Hmm.
something that was constantly on my mind. But when I was entering my fifth hour of playing it, of a like 12-hour day sitting on my couch playing it on last Saturday,
Hmm.
like there was this. Diablo has always been one of those games that like really zens me out. I really love the top-down isometric like RPG game, whether it be Diablo, whether it be Torchlight, whether it be Path of Exile. I love a lot of the games in that oeuvre, and Diablo is the godfather of them all.
Sure.
So there's a real like serenity that I find, and not to use that word lightly, but like I get into a real zen place when I'm playing those games, to the point
Yeah.
where I can sink 10 hours into it and not really realize what I'm doing, and like I feel really good doing that. Even though I'm spending 10 hours playing a video game, I know that's not
Yeah.
necessarily a productive use of my time outside of my own mental health. But when I sit back and remove myself from that zone and think about whether or not I'm helping a company like Activision Blizzard perpetuate itself despite the acts it has done in the past, or what the people in charge of that company have overlooked in the past in order to continue their own existence, it I don't know. It's just something I've been thinking about and wrestling with, and like I don't want to burden the whole show with this, but it is somewhat related to the D&D thing, because there was this whole legal fracas a few months back with Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro as well, in which it was really looking like they were about to turn their open gaming license, the OGL, into something that they more strictly controlled, which would have really damaged a lot of the third-party industry around tabletop role-playing games, which, as I just said at the top of the show, I'm interested in participating in. Not necessarily in creating, like, a version of their game, but
Right.
by damaging an open gaming license that has always facilitated the creation of third-party stuff that can kind of like attach itself to D&D and propagate
Mhm.
the industry, and like what if the film studio said, indie filmmakers, you're not allowed to use this particular film stock anymore?
Right. Right. Right.
That would
Yeah.
be the equivalent.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, here's the thing about it too: that all of this, as we sort of, look at this from a broader and broader standpoint of just not just video games, not just the commerce stuff, but any kind of art you're a fan of, generally, not even generally, pretty much always is connected to some money making business or something like that. So no matter what you're consuming, you've got to, as soon as you turn on something to watch it or play it or read it, that someone is making money from that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what to tell you. It's this sort of thing where it's like, it's nice to believe that all of this is about the people who make it and a one-to-one relationship with their audience, but it's just not. I remember I occasionally see people online or whatever go like, "Oh, they just made this movie to make money," and I go, "Every movie ever made has been made to make money by someone. Maybe not the person who wrote it or directed it or acted in it, but somebody financed that budget for that movie because they thought they could make money."
The guy putting up the lights was like, I'm getting $100 for this, right? At some
I mean,
indie film festival.
yeah, exactly. That's the thing where you're going. It. Once again, it's that thing we kind of ignore because you want to talk about the majesty of it and the beauty of the art of it and stuff like that. But ultimately, it costs money to make this stuff, and there has to be somebody with a checkbook who goes, "I bet this could make me more money if I let these people make a thing."
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's you got to make peace with the art versus commerce aspect of it.
Right.
And
And
to varying levels, right? Your indie film movie, maybe not as much as your Dungeons and Dragons movie.
right. And where the Dungeons and Dragons are concerned, the reason people were contemplating a boycott of this film was Hasbro kind of becoming a little bit more tyrannical with
Sure.
what they viewed as their product and what the
Right.
community viewed as something that has been built by the community and that Hasbro have been profiting off of. And
And I think in terms of like direct one to, because the other thing I go to is, as I was saying about like the Amazon is like, is me not buying products from Amazon going to make any goddamn difference in their thing? But the Dungeons and Dragons people, well, we are your direct consumers. There is this thing you make that we like. We can actually affect that. That makes more sense to me. And you have a license of something we love. You are doing something we don't like with it. Therefore, we can choose not to continue to consume it and actually make the hurt on that.
right.
Amazon's
And
big to do
to,
that, is what I'm saying.
to the point where, and the reason why this movie is probably still going to have a lot of D&D fans with butts in seats this
Mm-hmm.
last weekend was that Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro backed down during this whole
Yeah.
thing because the community at large made such a big vocal stink about this to the point where people were like, well, I guess we're done with D&D. We're going to be moving on to other systems and other games, and like
There you go.
a lot of other little indie game companies capitalized on that over the weekend. And Wizards of the Coast was like, oh wow, the one thing that Hasbro still has that is profitable. Well, actually, they have two things that are still profitable. Hasbro does: Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering. That's it. Like
Sure.
Milton Bradley ain't doing them any good these days.
Right. What?
Yeah, you can make all the collector's versions of Monopoly you want. They're just gonna sit in those shelves in Target.
Mm-hmm. Or you're going to be the Golden Girls version of it, and it's in my shelf here at home.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some other things that
Yeah, I
are.
was gonna say, let's get off of my moral high horse, John. John, what have you been consuming lately?
I've been watching a lot of stuff. Let's talk about a movie that almost directly plays into this. It's about video games. It's about commerce. The other night I watched Tetris on Apple
Oh, it's
TV.
on my list.
It is so good. This movie is so good. Whether you care at all about video games, it's such a great little. It's almost a thriller. It's the kind of movie I love where it's like, here's something that's so ubiquitous, and we all know Tetris. But did you know the story behind why it's ubiquitous is really interesting and weird, and like weird intricacies. I love stuff like this, movies like this. It's a totally different tone. Something like The Social Network, where like things we all take, you go like, oh, Facebook. You're like, oh, actually, the formation of Facebook was a huge thing. There's a movie coming out about the creation of the BlackBerry that I hear is great. That's a similar thing where it's like, did you know there was like huge upheaval and personal relationships destroyed during the creation of the BlackBerry and stuff like that? You're like, no, I
Did
didn't.
not.
Yeah, it looks real. So Tetris is so cool because it's a movie about this video game we're all familiar with. I mean, you got to say in terms of like just everybody, your grandmother knows what Tetris is. You know,
It has become such a mainstay of what we think of when we think of a video game. Like, if there is the puzzle game that you can point to, I
Yeah.
think at this point it's either going to be Tetris or a match three like Candy Crush or something. Like, those are the
Right.
two big ones.
Absolutely. And the movie kind of indicates at the end where it's still like the most downloaded game or whatever in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the whole story about this is it turns into this. It almost the way the movie plays it almost feels like a spy film because this is all dealing around the fall of Soviet Russia, and that's the other thing that's really interesting about it. It's not just Soviet Russia, but it's the end of Soviet Russia when everybody can kind of see the end of it coming, and people are trying to grab what's theirs. So you got rampant corruption and things like this, and into this is this real scrappy, hero played by Taron Egerton, and his attempt to go like, but this is just a great game. The thing that I love about it too, that of course appeals to people like you and I, is it is about like this American nerd and this Russian nerd, basically end up fighting the entire communist regime and the capitalist society because they both just think this is a great idea for a video game.
Mm-hmm.
There's a line in the movie that talks about like great ideas know no borders, and it is sort of that thing where it's like, and there's a great scene when they're both programming the game, just going, you could do this and this, and it's just like, I may be a Soviet, you may be an American capitalist, but we both are just obsessed about the purity of this game.
Well, and then you like entangle the whole Nintendo thing into it
Mhm.
because famously Tetris was packaged with the original release of the Game Boy.
And they get into that about how that came to be and stuff like that, and you do get the. I always love something my co-host on other shows, Brandon Jones, and I talk about is the two of us are comic book nerds in a way, but we also just love iconography in general. We just love the mythologizing of stuff. And there is a great point where they take Taron Egerton's character into the R&D at Nintendo, and they go, "You have to sign this NDA because we're going to show you something only 10 people in the world have ever seen." And they lift a sheet. He's like, "What do you call it?" And they're like, "It's the Game Boy." And the camera goes blowing. There's that kind of stuff where it is just, I can just get into iconography. Just the idea that it's the same thing as I really want to see that new Ben Affleck movie about Nike. And it is like, I need to build the greatest basketball shoe. Well, who's going to wear it? It's Michael Jordan. That kind of stuff. I'd love, it's all that sort of grandizing, mythologizing.
Well, we're getting to a point, and I think we probably hit this point about 10 years ago, honestly, is that there's such a turn in what modern culture is, maybe starting in like the 1950s, 1960s, in terms of like the music and the films and the eventually video games that have shaped modern society, that we now have a couple of generations past now where we can look back at some of these early goalposts of like, and at this point civilization as we track it has changed because of this cultural event, whether
Right.
that be Woodstock or the like Air Jordan like symbol on a Nike shoe or the release of the Game Boy.
Because I mean that movie also, which I haven't seen yet. Like I said, I really want to. Air. That's another thing that's like, oh, this thing that was, because when we were kids, Michael Jordan was the king, and everybody wanted those shoes. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh yeah, but there was like a bunch of people hustling to make that happen. And what's that story?
Turning the human being Michael Jordan into a brand insignia that
Yeah.
everyone, at least in Western culture, can recognize as like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
Michael Jordan, even though it's just the silhouette of a dude jumping.
Well, the thing is, it's interesting. I was a huge fan of the HBO show Winning Time that was just on about the Lakers
Mm.
basketball team, and literally in that show, I did not know that the NBA logo, the guy dribbling, that was a guy.
What?
Yeah, that the silhouette of the guy
Yeah,
dribbling.
yeah. That's a silhouette of an
That
actual person.
that's a silhouette of a Lakers basketball player named Jerry West.
Huh.
And people literally started calling him the logo. Don't piss off the logo.
I did not know that.
That man literally is basketball. Like,
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
yeah, no, it's the same thing, but that's what we're talking about. It's the iconography of. I'm sure there will be kids 20, 30 years from now who won't know Michael Jordan necessarily, but will know Air Jordan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I do think there's some, and that's the same. And the movie treats it like, oh my god, It's the Game Boy. And the movie also does this cool thing where it uses video game iconography to tell its story. The movie is broken up into levels in its chapters, and even at certain points, there's a car chase that turns all the cars into pixels, and it's on a road, and it's doing, and
Like
I'm sure
Spy
some of it
Hunter
is,
type stuff.
yeah, exactly, and like every time the car banks into like a building, it turns into a pixel, and you see it turn flash red, and you're just going like, there's lots of fun stuff that I love inventive filmmakers who, because that's the thing, I'm going like, I'm watching a movie about people arguing who has the rights to something, but it's so fun, it's so energetic, it makes such a good case for itself in that way. I'm always amazed by that. I was talking about that with Mad Men, where I'm like, why is this show so compelling when it's literally just about like, how are we going to advertise Hershey?
I actually just had a revelation about Mad Men about like why I think it is such a compelling show, and obviously like it centers around John Hamm's performance.
Sure.
There are so many shows and movies where you're presented with a character and you're told, oh, they're the best at the thing that they do. And it's
Yeah.
really hard to actually show that if you
True.
have like the best musician or the best writer or the best whatever.
Right.
Showing them be the best at a thing can sometimes be lackluster because they're never actually going to capture what that feels like. Whereas
Right.
you sit in a boardroom with John Hamm and he's
Yeah.
telling you why you want to smoke, and suddenly like,
Yeah.
oh shit, he's the best at what he does here. Shit.
That scene at the end of the first season when he pitches the carousel for the slide projector, and he's talking about memories or what form are, and you're like, God, I need to buy a carousel slide projector.
Right. Yeah.
No, it's true. It's true. I mean, it's a perfect, and that you talk about a perfect lineup of material and actor. You know, where you just go like, and we didn't know that was what broke John Hamm. Us not knowing him actually, I think, really worked for that, right? Because you go
Yeah.
like that guy, but you just go like, I want to watch this guy forever. I mean, it's one of the clearest. Like that guy's a star.
Yeah. I really want to see him in more comedy stuff, but you know, that's just me.
I do. Yeah, that guy's hilarious. Did you see Confess Fletch?
Yeah. That was amazing.
It's so good, and I agree with YouTuber Patrick Willems. Why are there not 6 more of those movies right now? Like that is just like I need to see him solve mysteries as Fletch for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
Because it's delightful. But anyway, Tetris is fantastic. Watch that. The other thing I'm really into right now is on Netflix, a show called The Night Agent, which is if you're into spy stuff.
Sounds so generic, John. I'm sorry, but it does.
The Night Agent is so good.
Does he come at night and is he an agent?
He works for the night. He's the guy who answers the night action phone line at the White House. A phone that will never ring. They tell him until it does.
Oh my.
And then he gets pulled into a whole conspiracy. It's really good though. I love it. It's from Sean Ryan, who created The Shield. It's really, really top level. You know, when you talk about it sounds generic, it's the kind of stuff I love though, where it's like it's not reinventing the wheel. It's just doing really solid genre storytelling. It's really well made espionage conspiracy stuff. So I the Night Agent is great, and it's been huge for Netflix. They like within a week of it coming out, they announced a second season because I guess it you know whatever, however many people, who knows with Netflix. It's always that thing about it says it's the most watched show on Netflix. I believe you, Netflix. Sure.
I'm so sick of some of Netflix's shenaniganery, I guess is the best way to put it. Like the way they treat some of their series is in terms of like how long they're allowed to run for seems so arbitrary to me. And obviously I'm not seeing the numbers and nobody is, but like
Right.
I don't understand their decision-making process on certain things.
Yeah. No one does, and that's kind of by design, right? It's sort of by not revealing how much stuff is being watched and stuff like that. It allows them to just go, the most people ever watched a thing. Trust us.
Yeah, I guess I'm still just salty about Inside Job getting canceled, but that show's
Sure.
great.
And I haven't watched Unstable, which I'm excited to watch, which is the new Rob Lowe sitcom on there. He's got a new Netflix show, and then also last thing, and then we'll move on to this thing. Just finished the new season of Party Down, which is amazing. And please, stars, give me so much more Party Down. Everybody wants it, and especially the showrunners going, we already know exactly what season 4 is.
I was a little worried because like a post-decade revival of a show is always a dicey prospect.
It is. This is one of the few that's like, man, it feels like this. It's the coolest thing because to me, they certainly, you have to acknowledge a decade has passed in the story. But at the same time, when you watch season 3, it's so good. It's so connected to the first season. It feels so natural that you're almost like, oh, is this like planned that this would be set 10 years later?
Interesting.
Like it just feels like season 3, and it happens to take place 10 years later. It's that good. Every character is right back in it. The writing is right on point. All the guest stars in this season have been amazing. It's hilarious. Party Down season 3 is epic. If you have stars, which nobody does, so even I don't have it. I'm still just stealing it from my parents. Well, not stealing it, but, you know.
You're,
Thank God, by the way, I hope my parents never get off the cable train, because so much of what I watch, people go like, "You have all the streaming services." I'm like, I really don't. I have like 2, and then the rest are just because my dad still subscribes to all the cable channels.
right, and God bless him for that.
Oh man, they need those 70 and plus people to be, you know. And my dad will never get off as long as live sports is still happening mostly on cable. So
What's insane to me is like you get this humongous cable package just for the sports stuff, right?
yeah,
And so
yeah.
he and by extension the rest of your family have access to hundreds of other programming blocks that are just completely ignored.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's insane. No, I've done it a couple times when I've gone through there, and you go into like, because he has like 800 channels,
Yeah.
and he regularly watches 6. You know, like
But that would be the thing, right? It's like, okay, outside of like the sports, live sports, like if
yeah,
he's actually watching narrative television that isn't like a network procedural, you go to
yeah.
like Hulu and Netflix, right?
That's it exactly. He's like, he still fires up his Apple TV to
Yeah.
watch any of his shows, but then he's like, I gotta watch the Blazers play. Whatever, man. Like I said,
I
I hope
regret
he.
explaining cord cutting to my father. That's all I'll say.
Yeah. Well, no, yeah, because like I'm like, oh, let's see what's going on Showtime. Uh, the answer, they got some good stuff, I guess. Showtime, and actually, as much as I love Party Down, Showtime and Stars have always been like, we don't know what we are.
Right.
We're not HBO, so, and even HBO may not be what it is thanks to Zaslav. Um,
Yeah.
although,
Yeah.
holy shit, if people, the new season of Perry Mason is so amazing. Anyway, all right, I love that HBO Perry Mason show because I'm 100 years old. All right, let's segue into our main review this week, which is about a little motion picture, which does have a colon in it because you can't make a movie now today without one. This is Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves.
Yes, indeed. Obviously, spoilers. I'm
Yep.
into this property, and this movie was saying, "Hey, Mike Gorgone." It might as well have been called Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves: Mike Gorgone's gonna love this flick.
I mean, let me ask you that, because Gorgoni, there's already been Dungeons and Dragons movies, baby. So I don't know what we're
Shut
talking
your
about.
mouth. Jeremy Irons has no place in this.
I was gonna say, can this possibly live up to that 2000 Dungeons and Dragons movie, which had no subtitle? So I'm gonna say is much more definitive. If
I
Marlon Wayans isn't in it, is it even a Dungeons and Dragons movie?
I gotta assume the whole reason they threw the colon on here is for two reasons. One, to disambiguate themselves from that movie.
Sure.
Even though, like, we live in an era where no one would have cared if this movie had just come out and been called Dungeons and Dragons as well.
No, we're on our like 8th movie called Halloween. You know,
Exactly. But B, they threw the colon in there and gave us a subtitle because, like, say this movie does good. Say we start franchise building. D&D is such an expansive, like, property, at least from the stuff that Hasbro owns, that, like, there's so many different ways you could take this. You have to start from the ground level, disambiguating it from what could come later.
And that's from what I gather is very much what Paramount is hoping for with this, right? They're already in somewhat development on a Dungeons and Dragons TV show for Paramount Plus. They really want this to be a shared universe of Marvel-esque stature.
Which seems insane to me because part of the draw of Dungeons and Dragons as a property and tabletop role-playing games broadly is the fact that each person each group of players experiences their own individual story, and sometimes it can be tied into like larger lore and narrative, but like even in the Dungeon Master's Guide, they make it explicitly clear. Even if you're playing in an established world, in an established setting, that then, as soon as you take your first action in that world, it becomes yours. And so while I'm watching this movie, it takes place in the Forgotten Realms, which is like kind of the standard D&D setting that exists today. It's where like Dris Do'Urden takes place. It's where like Elminster, who we get some mentions of, Mordenkainen, all of these names that are like tied to D&D lore spring up from the Forgotten Realms. And yeah, and people like you would just nod your head and go, okay, and not necessarily know that because they're just throwing a bunch of gobbledygook fantasy words at you, and you're just having to nod and accept them.
The thing that's I feel like that's this is a shared universe of stuff is interesting because what you're saying it seemingly should open it up to, then you could do absolutely anything in it. You could make any show, any movie, and set it in this universe. So in some ways, it kind of makes the most sense to do a shared universe of stuff in this because you're really only tied by ideas, right?
It's thematic, it's genre tropes, you're tying things together, and what makes this movie so good to me as a fan is what makes a good high fantasy D&D game good to me as a player or as a DM, and that is using the tropes and the like nomenclature that has existed for 30 plus years in ways that is either unexpected or that pleases me because it is the familiar. In the same way that Star Trek can do certain things where it's like, oh, well, we know Klingons have a bat'leth, so when a Klingon shows up with a bat'leth, you go, yeah, it's a Klingon with a bat'leth. I know what's happening here.
Right. Yeah. It's I mean, in some ways, like I said, that's actually saves it from being some of the like, are you guys going to do the such and such arc? Right. Because it is more like it's tropes, it's things. Even the thing about the fantasy genre specifically, and especially when we talk about high fantasy that this movie's playing in, even me not being a Dungeons and Dragons person, just being a consumer of pop culture, I'm loosely familiar with these concepts because they're not wholly unique. There are unique concepts of Dungeons and Dragons, but if somebody's talking about wizards and dragons and all this stuff, right? We're going like, well, I've seen Lord of the Rings, I've seen all this. I have a loose connection to what the tropes of a high fantasy story are anyway. And so the thing I really enjoyed about this movie, because I think the fact that this movie works for both of us is the sign of why this is such a good movie.
This is what I really want to dig into is with you specifically about what you connected to in this movie, because I had some conversations with folks after we got out of this movie. I saw it last night with a group of our friends, and
you're going to be fresher on it than I have because I got this is a brag, but it also is not great for this. Is I got to see it a couple weeks ago at an advanced screening. But that means you also are a lot fresher on this than I am because I saw it 2 weeks ago.
And John, let's be honest, I was always going to remember more details about this thing than you were.
It was an interesting thing because I'll set this scene a little bit. I saw it in an advanced screening, which means I got to see it with like the Uber fans. I mean, people were dressed as elves in the screening I was in. Sure. I mean, like people in costume at the thing I was at. And it was a rare experience that I got to be on the other side of where I didn't know what the hell people were clapping for. I loved the movie. I loved it. And I loved all the characters and the action pieces and the comedy of it. But unlike when I go to a Marvel movie, people are shouting out, as you're talking about, things you have already said, places, names, whatever. And I'm going, yeah, sure, yeah.
I'm going to guess there's a moment later in the film where they have to go... The party of heroes has to go track down this paladin guy, and they find him in a fishing village. And he is saving a young child from a big monster fish. And when they pull out
a cat person,
when the cat person comes on screen, did your theater cheer?
Yeah,
sure. That's because like seeing that realized a cat person on screen and just treated as blasé is kind of amazing for people who are fans of the fantasy genre that includes like animal people and bird people and dragon people, and that's just like a thing that we love and enjoy in fantasy stories but has never really been depicted well on screen.
I think, I mean, that's the thing, though, is like, but here's the thing that works so well about the movie. That your knowledge of that doesn't matter. I saw that much in the way I would see an alien in Star Wars and go, "That's cool.
Right.
That just looks good." And I don't know anything about the mythos of it, but the movie also, there's no point in the movie where I there are things in the movie where because people are cheering because it's a Glee Plop name or whatever, and I don't say that disparagingly about Dungeons and Dragons. I say that about across anything. I'd say that
You
about
could
Star
call it Technobabble. You could call it Gleeplop. You could
Glee
call it,
Plop, whatever. Yeah,
yeah.
whatever. Like I said, we're fans of the stuff. I know the stuff. I just like I know dilithium crystals or Gleep Glop to other people. So I don't want any. I don't want the letters from the D&D people. That's all I'm saying.
Sure.
But and by the way, if you're gonna send hate mail, please self-addressed stamped envelopes. Please. No.
If you're going to like get on someone's case about not understanding what attunement to the helm of discorporation and El Mr. Ordoon and like all of these other words that don't mean anything, then don't get also like upset if somebody doesn't understand like, oh, he got trapped in the transporter array field and
No, it's all the psychology and the fandom is all the same. It's just about the aesthetics you like, right? Like it's all the same thing. It's kind of in terms of that sort of fandom of universes and things like that. But the thing I was going to say is there was no point in the movie where beyond recognizing that must be a thing from the game that I like went like, I guess that's a thing from the game and I'll just have to accept I don't understand and move on. The movie is such a good movie. It's such a good script and the characters. This is the thing that really worked for me, of course, is just it's a great ensemble adventure movie. I do think I remember when the trailer came out and we said this, and it's totally true. This really does feel like fantasy Guardians of the Galaxy, which is not. I'm not being diminishing when I say that. I think that's a high compliment. I love anybody who's listened to our show knows how much I love the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and this really felt like that tone and attitude of this is a rockling, absolutely fun romp with a bunch of lovable characters through this big universe.
And that is my argument to folks who say that this movie might not be able to connect with people who aren't familiar with the canon of the property, right? Is that
Yeah.
nobody fucking knew what was going on in
No.
Guardians of the Galaxy unless you'd like read some like D tier comic books beforehand.
I mean, that's the thing. Even you and I were not like, as big a Marvel nerds as we both are. Even us are like, well, I know the basic gist of the Guardians of the Galaxy and some of their adventures.
I read the Annihilation Saga. I kind of know what's going on with them. Yeah.
It's the same thing with like they were the
But
Eternals.
Nova's the main character, right?
Yeah. You go like, wait a minute, I don't understand what any of this is. Where's that talking dog? Who's only now showing up in movie 3, really.
Yeah.
But no, but that's the thing that works, and I think that's always for anything. Dungeons and Dragons, Marvel, Star Trek, Star Wars. That's always the hurdle, right? Is can you make a movie that does all the stuff that the nerds want to shout out, but also is just a piece of entertainment for the because here's the thing: is like, and we've seen this time and time again. My beloved Star Trek is very much this case. We as Trekkies have very much made the case that pretty much we're the only ones who go to these movies. So I mean, like time and
Based
time
on
again.
box office returns, sometimes, yeah.
But that's the thing where it's like Paramount, it's kind of on you at a certain point that you keep spending this much money thinking anyone other than the hardcore fans are gonna go. But that's the thing is like to be a major successful blockbuster movie, it can't just be the fan base. I'm looking at you, Warcraft. There's a movie that skated by just on the. This is the exact opposite of Warcraft to me, actually, now that I bring that up. Warcraft was a movie that I sat through and went, I don't know who anyone is. I don't know what the hell is going on. This movie cannot make me understand why I should care about anything anyone's talking about.
It's a fascinating dichotomy between the two films because on paper, they're pretty much exactly the same in a lot of key ways, right? They're both set in high fantasy settings. They're both using names and terminology that, unless you're familiar with the source material, are just going to slide off of you. The huge difference between the two of them is while one is a slavish recreation of a story that predates the game most people are familiar with, This is simply using a pre-established world and lore to tell a new story. But a new
And
story that is like steeped in the tropes that we are familiar with.
and that's key, right? And the other thing though, and I think the biggest thing, and once again, mileage may vary. I know you were a bigger fan of that
Yeah,
Warcraft movie.
I really enjoyed it.
But this movie is fun. That movie was very serious. And not that this isn't, not that this movie is sincere, which is different than being like grim-faced, you know what I mean? Is
Sure.
like this movie's very funny. Now, I did wonder at certain points during the movie, I'm like, and I bet are there hardcore fans who are going, they're making a joke of this.
Every response I've seen in the communities that I frequent, whether it
Yeah,
be like those spaces on Twitter or Reddit or Instagram, name your social media platform, but I
right.
tend to frequent a lot of them, and I'm steeped in the D&D, let's call it community, for lack of a better term. I participate some, I don't do it a lot, but I am on the peripheries of a lot of those communities.
Yeah.
Most people are having such a positive reaction to this film
That's great.
because it is so lighthearted. Because one of the
Oh, that's great.
tenets of tabletop role playing games is rule zero is have fun.
There you
That's
go.
that's the top line. And if you're not having fun, why are you at the table? And whether or not you're having fun making jokes or doing really grim, horrible stuff as a vampire in certain like Vampire the Masquerade role-playing games. Like there are ways to have fun in different tones and genres, but
What's
have fun is rule
that
zero.
the biggest the that is the overriding word I have for this movie. This movie is so much fun. It is not just it is just it's a good time. This is regardless of any kind of if this didn't have Dungeons and Dragons and it was a big new fantasy movie, I would just say, "My God, this is what I want to see when I go to the movies. Likable people doing fun stuff, great action. I mean, literally one of the funniest scenes I feel like that will be for the year. We're only in April, but that scene where they're bringing back the dead people in the cemetery is laugh out loud hilarious.
The bit where the illusion is malfunctioning
Yeah,
and the illusion that the sorcerer is casting of Chris Pine's character Ed is like sort of melting and malfunctioning like some kind of like warped digital thing was so like everyone in my theater was dying at that part.
is straight up funny. But the reason I say that is I guess I'm so used to the Marvel people who like to bag on Marvel going like, we take these characters seriously, and it's nothing but jokes in these Marvel movies.
And I guess here's another thing that this movie has over, say, Marvel films is all of these characters, for the most part, are wholly new. There
Right? You
are,
can't you can't go. That's not my Holga.
yeah, I would say the only character here that has any like lore baggage associated with him would be Elminster, the great 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 grandfather of Simon.
Oh, sure. Okay, sure. Yeah.
Like he is an established lore character that's been in books and stuff, and
Okay.
like but he's barely in this movie, and he's just there to be a smug asshole, which is sort of in character. So
Okay, sure, yeah. And great, like I said, but I do think it's I think one of the thing I always go back to with the Marvel stuff though is I think, and this movie does this too, and this is what I'm talking about with the humor of it. That's huge to making the general audience like this stuff because, like I said, in some of your grimmer stuff, I don't mean to keep bagging on Warcraft. Not that movie's grim, but it's very serious. Is it makes me go, oh, I'm supposed to be taking this seriously, and I don't know what anybody's talking about. But when people are kind of laughing and joking, it makes the world feel more real to me because they live in the world, and so they're just like, yeah, that's that thing. Isn't that weird? Like I mean, like, and I think that's so much of why the Guardians works. But I think there's a big reason why the Marvel movies are approachable to. My dad is always the barometer. My dad doesn't give a shit about any of this nerdy stuff, right? We were just talking about he's a sports guy, but he likes movies. He likes
right,
entertaining movies, and he
sure.
loves the Marvel movies because he goes, they're fun. I can go and laugh. I like the action. I like the characters. Everything in it is about having a good time, and I feel like that is very much the case here, where these are likable, jovial people, and their humor actually makes me take the world more seriously because it's what you're talking about. It is blasé. To them, this is their world. I'm going, well, if they're laughing about this, then this feels like how I probably would live in a world going like, look at this dumb thing.
Look, we're going up north. We're going to dig up some dead people and talk to them. Oh, yeah, good. Have a good time.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, it's that sort of thing. Oh my God. Also, we already said the spoilers warning, so whatever. But the Bradley Cooper cameo that I did not see coming was just goddamn hilarious. Tiny Bradley Cooper is so funny.
Michelle Rodriguez's character, Holga, who's like into halflings, I guess. And that's totally cool. But like,
That's what it seems like to me. But of course, is also a funny juxtaposition because she's a big, muscly warrior character, and yet she's into tiny little Bradley Cooper, who's having so much fun just being the straight man with the comedy being he's a shrunk down Bradley Cooper.
That's the key to that scene is that like
Yeah.
both of them are playing it so straight faced, and by the end of the scene you are a little just like, oh, this is a relationship that can't be salvaged, and that's actually sad despite the fact that the running gag is he's a small person.
They are playing it as straight indie drama.
Yeah.
But yeah, but he's a shrunk down Bradley Cooper, who I love that he would do that. I also love that surprise was not ruined for me. I didn't know he was in this, so that was delightful. I love a good I love a good cameo, and that's a good cameo. That scene was great. I mean, like I said, and everybody in this, the whole the nature. I mean, you know, there's things that are obvious, but it's well done. The wizard who's not good at magic, but you like him.
Well,
And
Justice Smith playing Justice Smith.
Yeah, he does. He's kind of cornered the market on these roles, right?
It's just like the goofy, semi-incompetent who you like despite that fact.
I love this guy, man. I'm so glad he's become kind of a big deal. He's very funny. He's very likable. Without, you know, everybody in this is so effortlessly charming. And that we got to start then with Chris Pine, who I just fucking love Chris Pine, man. I would watch this guy in anything. You talk about a guy who just is a movie star in that I'll watch him in anything. We talked about that really not very good movie, Don't Worry, Darling. He was great in like the 3 scenes he's in.
Sure. But I love seeing him in a starring performance where he is the heart and soul at the center of this movie, right? Because it's his relationship with his wife and his daughter that drives the whole thing. And the fact that we never really lose sight of that, despite all the goofiness that can surround a mission like that, is so... You talk about this movie not taking itself seriously and how that might be levied as a criticism. The fact that Ed at the center of this never loses focus, really, on his mission, because he's driven by the fact that one time he did lose focus on his mission, I think is such a key, crucial piece of this character that I found so engaging.
Something I talk about with the Marvel movies, with a lot of the big tentpole films is, and I think it's something that people go in with sort of some comic book fans in particular, right? Going with like, they're making jokes. It's like, but are they being sincere? I look for sincerity in these movies. And this movie is very funny, is very silly in places, but it's always sincere. It is always about sincere characters with emotional undercurrents. You know, it's a studio movie. And I'm somebody who loves classical Hollywood studio things. So like, yes, nothing's going to throw you for a loop. You can kind of see they're building this, oh, wait, I want to bring my wife back, but oh, wait, Michelle Rodriguez has been the mother to my daughter the whole thing. So at the end of the movie, when she dies, you know, I'm going like, oh, they're going to do that. But I'm not going like, oh, they're going to do that. I'm going, oh, that's good. That's good. We're dealing in gigantic scope. So sometimes simple but clear storytelling and character work is the best thing for these movies. You know what I mean? Like, that's not a diminishing quality.
I honestly think it's almost a requirement when you have something so gonzo and out there as a high fantasy setting, is keeping the stakes very, very clear, whether that be throw the evil ring into a volcano or make sure the family that I've created is whole and safe at the end of this movie. Like, that's everything in terms of these big, wild fantasy or science fiction settings.
Absolutely. And that's the thing about, I mean, that's the thing with the Guardians connection with, that's a movie about a family, what it means to be a family, how you keep a family together. That's totally what this is. It's I mean, it's kind of what Star Trek is too. I mean, you talk about Chris Pine in this kind of role. I am going like, yes, damn, he's doing a lot of the same stuff that so worked for me about his performance as Captain Kirk. He's doing here. He is the brash hero guy, but a vulnerable one. And oh boy, I've already seen the like, why can't we have strong male heroes anymore? Everybody's got to be a goof who's getting their ass kicked.
He's bashing the wizard lady in the face with a lute at the end of this movie. Like he's making the plan, and the plan fails. He makes another plan. Like he's a smart, clever, like rogue.
Yeah, that's
he's
exactly.
a gentleman thief. We love that trope.
He's my kind of hero, right? He's got the Han Solo or the Captain Kirk quality. He's a guy who, sure, can throw down in fisticuffs should it come to it, but he's more of a guy who goes, I'm going to be clever and come up with a way out of this, and those are the kind of guys I like. But then, of course, I guess because what they really mean is also a white guy. But I was going to say, then you've got Roger Jean Page as the Paladin, who just comes in and rules for like 20 minutes in this movie.
I'm so glad they used a light touch with him. I think this is a character who could have gotten very grating had been in the whole movie. They took Drax and they cranked him up to 11 and they threw him in 20 minutes of this movie, and I think he works perfectly for where he is.
He's so great, and he's for his little section of the movie is awesome. And I also love, once again, I know enough about the D&D, lore and stuff like that the idea that the Paladin comes in and he's the perfect guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Then that makes all the other characters better because you get Pine going like, oh, this guy, man, like, Jesus Christ, is this guy for real?
I do not consort with colloquialism.
The other thing that really killed me is when he's just walking away and he goes, he's just walking in a straight line. Oh wait, he's come to a rock. What's he gonna do? Nope, he's just gonna walk right over it.
My favorite bit, it's such a weird little random gag, is while they're having the conversation directly after that, you can see him in the background of the shot still walking away. It's so funny to me.
Well, we should talk about who made this movie. John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein are the writers and directors of this movie.
We love them. We've been following their careers forever.
Well, at least John Francis Daley. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, John Goldstein. I mean, yeah, certainly since they've paired up. I mean, these are the guys who wrote Spider-Man Homecoming.
Yep.
Which also has this same level of comedy mixed with sincerity mixed with action. They made Game Night. If people haven't seen Game Night, go watch Game Night. That movie is so good.
Game Night's very good. Goldstein's also wrote an episode of Bones, which is probably where he connected with John Francis Daley. John Francis Daley was one of the stars of that show for the longest time.
Yeah.
But his writing credits go back to the Gina Davis show. Do you remember that?
Of course I do. You're talking to somebody who knows this 3-camera sitcoms. I watched the Gina Davis show.
But what a weird thought process.
And actually,
occurred, the Gina Davis needed a sitcom.
They didn't meet on Bones because you know who played the son on the Gina Davis show.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Just before Freaks and Geeks, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it was either exactly. So he was on there, and so I think that's where they've been working together for a long time because he's a real industry. I mean, they're both industry veterans. It's just John Francis Daley started so young.
Mm-hmm.
But they really become guys who, ignoring their Vacation reboot, which was terrible, but I don't entirely blame them. They also wrote Horrible Bosses, which is hilarious.
I love the first Horrible Bosses. I think that's a very funny movie.
Well, they only wrote the story for the second one, so they did not actually write the screenplay for the second one, which does have Chris Pine in it, though, which is interesting.
And the second one is a fun airplane movie. I'll give it that.
It's totally watchable. Yeah, it's totally watchable. But it's another one of those things where it's like, oh, comedy is surprise hit, make a sequel, and you're like, ooh, comedy sequels not generally a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Chris
Did
Pine
we not learn her lesson with the Hangover films?
Yeah, that's sort of the thing where it's like it's really tough to. Although they did write a movie that I think that I love and people don't, and it's not really that good. But that's The Incredible Burt Wonderstone with Steve Carell.
Yeah,
I really enjoy that movie. It's goofy. It has a very committed Jim Carrey performance that's hilarious. Oh, I forgot they also wrote the Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs,
which actually I really liked the Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2. which they also
I
wrote.
agree. Yeah, I like both of those movies. I think those are really fun. Those are also Lord and Miller, who we love as well too.
Hmm.
So, and I think they have a similar thing. But man, they are totally the right guys to make this movie. They have such a great understanding of legit story, great, actually funny jokes. Because a lot of like big tentpole blockbuster movies have humor in them, but it's not always actually. Like I feel like I see a lot of blockbuster movies that will have lines where I'm like, yeah, yeah,
But this movie does such a good job of conveying humor on a visual level on top of
yes,
just having jokey jokes. Like you talked about the scene where he walks over the boulder and Chris Pine's narrating
yep,
over that. And like that's a fun little bit, but like the whole Jarnathan thing in their
yep.
parole hearing, just saying the name Jarnathan isn't like a joke,
Really,
but you say it enough
Jonathan?
times.
I think who I think would really have an opinion about this is Jonathan. Um, And also, you talk about a way once again to make it like he's telling this story. Chris Pine is telling his backstory in this parole hearing. Which, by the way, a parole hearing in a fantasy dungeon is just funny
Mm-hmm.
in general, right? Like, you like people get paroled, and also, of
Yep.
course, they do the whole escape and the idea of we were going to approve it. Okay, uh, funny. But the other thing I love about that, and feels very uh marvelly, which kind of makes sense that these guys wrote that first Spider-Man movie, because that tone is totally the guys who wrote that Spider-Man movie making this movie makes a ton of sense to me,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, but like he's telling this very serious backstory, but then they keep cutting back to this like, but is Jonathan here yet? Because that would be um it's hilarious. And I
But it's
think
less
that
of like punchline setup joke, right? It's more of like
right.
a gag that is incredibly well executed. And when you
The
have a
humor is coming out of character. It doesn't feel like we're just glomming punchlines into people. A lot of it is the interaction between everybody in this movie is so good. Can I talk about my MVP though? Hugh Grant. Hugh Grant is having the time of his life in this movie.
somebody let Hugh Grant off the leash for this role. It's
I
like, can you crank your smarm up to 11 and see what happens?
The current era of Hugh Grant, I'm so loving Hugh Grant aging into character actor. He is having, and he's because he was legit. I don't know if you know that. I don't know if you remember, like maybe I don't know 6, 7 years ago, he was going, "I'm done. I'm retiring from acting because they don't send me anything interesting. I don't want to do these stupid rom coms anymore. It's all anybody wants me to do."
Mm-hmm.
And now I see him all the time because people go like, "Oh wait, he can be like a weird side character or a bad guy," which I love that he's both. He's a bad guy, but not the villain. He's just this sniveling douchebag in this movie. And every moment you can feel him having the time of his life. He is having so much fun in every scene with every line reading. You know.
The bit with the tea was a little over the top. It's just like, is
Oh
tea
man,
too hot?
that's what and that's the stuff where you're going like he was just riffing right on that kind of stuff. Like,
I would be very curious to know what levels of improv were done here, because
yeah,
something that is so quintessential to the tabletop role playing game experience is the fact that
mhm,
everyone at the table whatever the level of like inhabiting your character you actually approach at the table varies from group to group. Like whether or not you're like, okay, everyone is in character, we only refer to each other as character names, or if you're just narrating what your character is doing. There's a different approach to whatever. But at the end of the day, everyone is improving what they're doing. Whatever your characters are saying, whatever your characters are doing, you're making up on the spot. There's no script to this. So
right.
a lot of the humor that is born out at a table between a group of friends is done because you're just spitballing. You're just making shit up on the fly. Sometimes you're going to say, I throw the potato at the monologuing bad guy to interrupt him. And like
Yeah.
that feels so quintessentially D&D, so quintessentially like tabletop role-playing game nonsense, and there's so much of that in this film, and Hugh Grant is at the center of a lot of it because he
Yeah.
does feel like the smarmy guy who betrays the party and tries to walk away with all the gold and only cares about the payday.
Mhm.
It's so good.
It's so good. And I think that's the thing is I don't know how much of it is improvised, but the fact that it feel here's the thing, because I do feel like improv has kind of become not a great thing in modern comedy. I
It
look
can
at
be.
yeah, I definitely it's a double-edged sword, right? Because I always feel like and I know it's a hot button issue, but my issue so much with that 2016 Ghostbusters movie isn't that, oh my God, it's women Ghostbusters. It's that it feels like they didn't have a script or like a solid script, and they went, these people are all funny. Can you guys improvise a lot? And the movie feels like when you're like, why is Melissa McCarthy talking about soup for 10 minutes? It's like, oh, because we need a bit here. And she is fun. And it's not just that movie. I see a lot of stuff like this where I just go like, we don't have much of a script, but we'll hire funny people and they're improvised. And you can kind of feel like you people are funny, but I'm watching people try to make a thing funnier. This has what I like. That's what I was going to say. The compliment I'm paying this movie is I don't know how much is improvised, but the fact that it all feels so natural, so in character, is you could tell me it's all scripted and it's just that good, or a lot of it's improvised and it's similar. It does have that off the cuff, casual feel to it that really makes comedy work when it's so character centric.
And the truth of the matter is, there's probably a decent combination of the two.
I would say so, and I think that's the best stuff is like that.
Yeah.
I really think that we got too far into like it's all improvised. You're like, well, writing actually is important.
I mean, that's one of my biggest criticisms of one of my least favorite Marvel movies, right? Is Iron Man 2. Is it feels too loose to me.
It's almost entirely improvised, of course, where it's like, we just got to get from place to place, man. And, and you're going like, well, some of it works when Rockwell's on screen. He's great, obviously.
Get this man his bird. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's funny stuff there, but I agree that the criticism of Iron Man 2 are sometimes not the right criticisms of that movie, where I'm going, no, it's not that there's too much shield stuff. It's that like scenes feel like, is this scene over yet?
Mm-hmm.
Did we successfully improvise to the end of the scene? I also want to point, if people enjoyed Hugh Grant in this, I just want to point people to this movie in general. A couple months ago, Operation Fortune came out, the Guy Ritchie spy movie. Criminally underseen. It's really good. But he is similarly having so much fun playing basically a Bond villain in that. And so Hugh Grant, man, that good. I'm so glad, because I was always like, this guy's such a good actor. And Hollywood is just like, no, you're going to fall in love with Julia Roberts now. You're going to fall in love with Sandra Bullock now. And you're like, of course he was good at that. But it's sort of like that. You could sleepwalk through those roles. You know what I mean? Like,
what did you think of the main bad guy of this film, Sophina, the evil undead wizard lady?
I thought she was fine. I mean, like, cool look. She's a little not bland, because I think she does just fine, but like she's very much what I expect. I think the smart thing in the script was to have the Hugh Grant character be the sniveling, talking bad guy, and she is kind of this force that's there. And it is cool when they have their big throwdown with her at the end. It was really cool.
I guess the reason I want to bring her up is Daisy Head is an actor who has been showing up more and more in stuff, and is a little bit like nerd culture royalty to me, because she's the daughter of Anthony Stewart Head, Giles from Buffy.
Yeah. Giles, who's giving his own supervillain performance over on Ted Lasso right now.
Yes, absolutely. But she is also in a show, speaking of fantasy stuff that I'm really digging right now, Shadow and Bone over on Netflix.
Oh, wow. That's interesting, because I was going to go, she was on Sandman, but yes, Shadow and Bone.
Sandman too, but Shadow and Bone is really good.
Okay. Haven't seen any of it.
I don't know if you'd necessarily connect with it, John. It is very like YA novel adjacent stuff.
That's kind of what I looked at. Once again, I don't besmirch anyone. It's awesome if you like stuff. I'm not here to criticize, but yeah, that I kind of went, you know what? I'll stick with my Sandman.
It's got cool fantasy world building in it as well, and I think
I like Ben Barnes. Well. He's a good actor.
Yeah.
But yeah, but no, I mean, I think she's good. I think the character is purposely written to be very tropey.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I mean, you're literally dealing with a group of people called the Red Wizards, and their whole thing is, let's just kill everybody and turn them into zombies. Like, that's so what I mean. Rote.
And that's where I'm going, though. That's where the addition of the Hugh Grant character, though, adds a lot more to the villain side in terms of personality, and allows that character to actually be okay, the fact that she's kind of just a trope, and I think also grounds the movie in somebody who's not silly. Somebody who's not being funny. Yeah. It's kind of like, it's actually one of the reasons people talk down about Ronan the Accuser in Guardians of the Galaxy. And I'm like, no, he kind of needs to be that in that movie.
Right.
You know, people go like, that's a lesser Marvel villain. It's like, yeah, but he's kind of designed to be like a boring, serious, evil guy.
And a villain, it's almost a trope at this point, is the band of misfits and the villain going, "Why aren't you taking this seriously?"
Yeah. I mean, say what you will about Rowan the Accuser, but Lee Pace has one of the funniest line deliveries in that first Guardians movie when he just when he drops all pretense of the Ronan the and he just goes, what are you doing? Like all of a sudden, this guy was like, "You stand accused." All of a sudden, just like, what the hell?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's great. And of course, yes, that you can defeat these characters with shenanigans.
Yeah. And well, nobody's defeated with shenanigans outside of Hugh Grant having a potato thrown in his face.
To be fair, Hugh Grant is sort of perpetuating shenanigans of his own, so
It's true.
turn out his fair play.
I think there is a good like team combo like defeat the bad guy at the end of this movie, and
Sure.
the final Owlbear Hulk kill on her was extremely satisfying moment in the audience I saw it with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We haven't talked about Sophia Lillis in this, who's also an actor who's been kind of up and coming, who I love. And you want to talk about what I'm mad about Netflix canceling her show, I Am Not Okay With This. I am not okay with that being canceled because I love that show.
Yeah, she was one of the kids in It, right?
Yeah, she's Beverly in It. And she also did a Nancy Drew movie. I didn't see Sharp Objects on HBO, but I heard she's great in that. And like I said, yeah, she's somebody. Oh, I did see Uncle Frank though with her and Paul Bettany, and she's amazing in that. That's a little indie drama that I highly recommend people check out. Really, really good, amazing Paul Bettany performance.
I feel like she was pretty good in this movie, but unfortunately her character felt like a little bit they just needed somebody to be the Deus Ex Machina in a lot of scenes, and her character felt like the one that needed to do that. I don't think she was given like visually her character does a lot of the more like fantastical stuff in the movie.
I mean, you get one of the coolest scenes because you get that scene where it's all sort of an unbroken take as she's switching between different, animals and bugs and stuff like that. I thought that was a really cool sequence.
Sure, absolutely. But in terms of like memorable character moments, as
I mean,
opposed to
she's got the fun dynamic with Justice Smith
yeah,
that I think is cute. It's cute.
no, and she's way more of the straight man to the rest of them as well, because she's the one who's allowed to look at this dysfunctional group and go like, "This isn't working, and y'all are idiots."
But then also be part of them by the end of it. I mean, I think you're right, but I think they were smart to cast a very charismatic actress in the part.
I think
And
she's a very good screen presence. Yeah.
and also, from what I gather of the cast, the only like real D&D fan of them.
Interesting.
No, I think Michelle Rodriguez said, "I've played D&D," which I'm going might have something to do with when you dated Vin Diesel. Michelle, you got to be in my campaign.
Yeah.
And then of course I love Chris Pine going, "Oh, I'd never played." I'm like, "No, of course not. You're a cool guy, Chris Pine." Never played D&D. And then Hugh Grant, being Hugh Grant at Comic-Con going, "Well, I'm into a different kind of Dungeons and Dragons, but that's neither here nor there." Like, you charming British man.
I found it pretty funny in the I don't know, in the theater you saw this in, did they have the welcome back to the theater cast thing at the beginning, which I found a little insufferable?
Because you can feel the gun being cocked to Hugh Grant's head.
Yeah.
Chris Pine's doing like, "Hey, everybody, how's it going?" And Hugh Grant's going, "Yes, thank you so much for coming to the movies.
Yeah.
Can I go now? For the love of God, man."
But
I mean, Hugh
Sophia
Grant,
Lillis and Justice Smith say nothing throughout the whole little intro. I found that hilarious.
Yeah, it's like we have too many people to spread this around. Because I went to the advanced screening of the Batman, and that was a similar thing where it's like, "Welcome everybody," and once again, Robert Pattinson is there. Somebody's got a shotgun in his back. So just like, "Thanks everyone for," because I think Pattinson and Hugh Grant are both similar, and they're like, "We like doing the acting. We like nothing else about this job."
Yeah.
And if anyone can look up Hugh Grant at the Oscars from this year to really see, I don't know if you saw any of the red carpet interview that went viral, where he basically is just like, "I couldn't give a shit about. Like, he's just kind of, he's pretty open about just like, and he's an older guy now, so I think he's really just like, if I don't want to be here, you're gonna fucking know it. Like, I can't, man. Yeah, and I get that. Or he's just like, I don't want to do the press. I just want to be in movies, for the love of God.
Yeah, somewhere his publicist backed up a dump truck full of money and said, "Please go to the Oscars."
Well, I will say I was looking at, because of course I will, as always, was looking at the toy section of a Target, and the fact that there's a Hugh Grant action figure because of this movie fills me with delight. He's a guy who never thought he'd be an action figure.
I oppose the idea of action figures for this movie.
Really?
What I want is D&D scale miniatures for each of these characters.
Sure.
But having actual action figures seems antithetical to the brand to me.
Except for, I mean, okay. But that's where we're just into blockbuster movie territory. And
Sure,
Hasbro
I know.
And figures, baby.
And I'm sure Hasbro's not crying about it either.
No, and I didn't buy any of them because I as much as I enjoyed this movie, I don't need to like own the merch from it. But
No, the only merch I've seen out of this movie that like gave me pause was at AMC theaters. They have a D20 shaped popcorn tin that you can buy.
I actually have you seen the collector's cup? I thought the collector's cup was cool. It looks like an old like mead stein, but it has little silhouettes of all the characters. But it's got this. Well, you were at AMC, so I guess this was at
No,
Cinemark.
I was at Regal when I saw them.
You were at Regal. Damn a Cinemark. But if you want to get into my thoughts about Cinemark, they're super nerdy because I think the projectors are better. But that's
No, that's fine. I actually want to talk about my projector experience at this film.
Was it bad?
What we went and saw was what's called a Screen X showing.
Oh
of this
no!
film.
Oh, I've been to a Screen X movie. Don't do that.
It was the showtime that worked.
Yeah. I don't recommend that experience in general, though.
I know. And I was thinking back on like the last couple of times I've tried this, because I think every time I go to a Screen X showing, I go, "Oh, that wasn't great. Let's never do this again." And then a few years will pass, and I'll be like, I seem to remember going to a Screen X showing. What if I did that again? And this was the next time in that cycle.
I went once out of curiosity. I saw the second Jumanji movie in Screen X, and I'm like, "This is the stupidest shit." I really did not like that, because you talk about, different things to get people in the movies that are gimmicks. I'm like, this one is pure gimmick. It is pure gimmick.
For our listeners who don't know, Screen X is this multi-screen experience in which the movie surrounds you and you become engulfed in the narrative and the heart of the film. And so they have two extra projectors projecting at the walls to either side of you in the theater. And so there are pieces of the movie, and here's where the thing sort of falls apart, is that it is only pieces of the movie.
Correct.
In which they extend the screen all the way around you so that you have this sort of panorama view. And what it feels like most of the time is that these are the sections of the movie that were filmed for IMAX, and they're just putting the IMAX bits to your left and to your right.
Oh, and what it is, of course, is it's all just digital. It's usually digital creation of, like, if you're in a forest, there's even more forest or whatever, right? Like,
this Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves didn't do that. There are pieces of this movie where, like, there are actors to my left or to my right.
Oh, but there aren't. Here's the thing about this. They're still, like, they're not detailed. They're like digital creations of figures. Because I looked at this one time, I'm like, that's not The Rock over there in the Jumanji movie.
Maybe, I don't know. That one of those bits definitely looked like Justice Smith to me.
I don't know, but it's all so. Here's the thing about all of this stuff, and get ready for John's brief rant. I promise.
Sure.
But like,
no, I just thought it was an interesting film experience. I'd be curious to. I wouldn't recommend it to people.
No, because here's the thing about it is there's this feeling, and this is a part of this, and people talk about, like, I remember a couple years ago, people talking about, well, movies will be obsolete once VR becomes a thing. It's like, movies aren't an experience to me. That isn't what I'm not looking to be engulfed in a film. That's a different thing. Show me a movie. The art of cinema to me is telling people, look at this. Now look at this. You know what I mean? Like, that's sort of the thing. So this whole idea about like you can be everywhere and live the movie. I'm like, I don't want to. It's the 3D thing too, where I'm like, I don't want it coming out. I just want to watch a film. For the love of God. The high frame rate was also that same thing where it's like,
Yeah.
now it can look less like a movie. It's like, I want movies to look like movies, though. I don't know what are we trying? It's always this thing where it's like, you're trying to fix something that's not broken, you guys. People like movies.
The only time the Screen X experience like worked for me is the last time I saw it, and what's probably got me back in the theater this time was when I saw one of the last Fast and the Furious movies.
Sure.
And there are bits in that movie where you're flying down a road and stuff's zipping by to either side of you in
Yeah.
the two opposite screens. That can feel very engaging and draw you in.
I heard the Star Trek one was the last Star Trek Beyond was in it. I heard that was kind of cool because once again, you're sort of like when the Enterprise is in space, you're consumed by space, which I mean, in some ways, once again, I'm sort of against the whole thing, but like that makes sense where it's like, okay, if you're going to be in an environment as expansive as space, having that surround you is kind of cool, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or people talk
I would say the same thing about like
the bridge of the Enterprise felt huge because there were like people on consoles, so it felt bigger. I mean, it's an interesting idea.
yeah. I'd be curious to see a film like Avatar 2 or like any kind of ocean-based movie to like simulate the underwater stuff. I think could be interesting.
This is now this brings me to my point about Avatar, which I'm not a fan of course, but this is me not bashing on it, but I do think the appeal of those movies are more experiential, which is why I'm not into them. But I understand the people who go. Something I figured out about that franchise is why nobody ever talks about the story is people don't really care. They just want to go look at the stuff. And that's great. Well, it's not great, but I mean, it's fine. But I do think that's sort of the thing where when I hear people talk about the Avatar movies, they don't talk about them like they talk about other movies. People just go like, oh, the water and the
They're
thing.
the most expensive art house movies ever made.
Dude, I mean, and when I've just been like, Cameron, pack it in and just make the nature doc on Pandora. Just do it.
Yeah.
Forget trying to tell a narrative, man, because everybody always is like, "Oh, it's beautiful. The story is blah." But it's just so I'm going, just go where the money is, man. Ditch the story entirely. I mean,
honestly, if he gave me a 3-hour nature documentary where he got like Morgan Freeman or somebody to narrate the majesty of Pandora, I would kind of be all over that.
I think it would make just as much money. I really do. I really think people would be like, ooh, because people just kind of want to go, ooh, ah. And even Cameron's talking about, yeah, the movie's, 3+ hours because there's 20 minutes when we're just looking at stuff. I'm like, that's great. I don't want to sit through that because I like stories, but,
Have you still not
sure,
seen Way of Water?
Oh, no. I probably won't.
Oh, interesting.
I thought the first movie was intolerable. I can't even imagine what I would think of this one.
Sure. Saw it twice in theaters. Whatever. To each their own.
To the experience of it, right? Though I mean, that's what I think. So it's like I said, people talk about it like they've been somewhere. I think to me that's more the appeal of something like Denis Villeneuve's Dune, which did take me somewhere, but also told me a story. But look, if we're gonna get into that classic Villeneuve versus Cameron debate,
The classic debate, yeah.
oh man.
I guess ultimately my experience with the Screen X was just like it was a fun little detour, and there are bits of it that work in the movie. I think largely it doesn't, and it became really noticeable that large sections of the film didn't even utilize the multi-screen experience. It would just like be black, and there would just be the movie in front of us.
Yeah. I think that's another thing too, where it's like if it's gonna be an experience, then it kind of has to go all in on it, especially if you're paying extra for it. Because that'd be like the 3D movies. It's like we're taking our glasses off, we're putting them on, we're taking them off, we're putting them on.
Can't stand that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, you can't. To me, I am so a purist. I love the IMAX because it's just a bigger screen, louder
Better
sound.
Yeah.
That's where I care about. It's like, can we make the movie itself as great a picture and sound as possible? I still just care about that. I find everything else, like Screen X, I just found distracting. Is what when I saw that Jumanji, I just kept looking and going like, what is over there? Well, that's weird,
Are there any 4DX screens near us? I don't think there are.
There are no 4DX screens. There are D-Box, which is the ones where the seats move, but they don't have the experiential, the smells and the feelings. Like
Because
where it feels like it's raining on you.
that's the other like weird movie as experience
That's and
thing.
that truly is where I'm like, all right, you know what? Just get on a fucking roller coaster then. You know?
But look, there are some
Sorry.
movies there I wish they were a roller coaster. Could I have enjoyed Godzilla King of the Monsters a little bit more had it also been a roller coaster? Maybe.
It all depends on what you're looking for. I'm always like I just want a good movie to make me feel like I'm on a roller coaster. Uh, that to me is always the art of it. To leave all the gimmicks and gadgets, because at the end of the day, it is sort of anytime they try to do something, we kind of always end up just reverting back to, oh no, it kind of just works if we shoot it at 24 frames a second and it looks like this. 'Cause otherwise,
And
like I said, like the VR thing always got me because I'm going, well, that's just a different thing. I
yeah.
don't understand how VR would replace film. It's just VR is great, but it's its own thing.
Well, and part of the magic of the film, of the movie going experience, and why the video at the front of Dungeons and Dragons of the cast being like, "Thank you for being here," was so cringy, is something that we don't
Yeah.
really talk about as part of the film experience because it is part of the theater experience, and that is multiple people, hopefully large groups if you want the movie to
Yeah.
be successful, experiencing something together and enjoying it all or not enjoying it all on like a same wavelength. It's these group communal experiences that have a different sort of energy to them, and it's undeniable. Like it's the same thing with a concert or
Is
certain organized religions. Like doing a thing together with lots of people can feel really good.
it can. Here's old man yells at cloud a little bit though. About it is I love that idea. I almost never am in screenings that feel like that though. Because not everybody is taking it as seriously as I am. Not
Sure.
everybody is here to truly engage with the movie. I also saw John Wick Chapter 4, which is an incredible experience, an absolute masterpiece of action filmmaking. Um, but throughout that whole movie, I got a guy making noise. I got a bored kid. By the way, don't take your fucking kids to John Wick Chapter 4. I got a kid who's squirreling. He wasn't like disturbed. He was just like, this movie is almost 3 hours long, and this kid's going, when they're not shooting guns, he's moving around and going, oh, they're talking about the high table, whatever, right? The rules of an assassin and stuff like that.
What does it mean to be alive? Why do you live, John Wick?
That's the thing. There's a lot of that kind of stuff in John Wick Chapter 4, right? Where it's just like you're a killer, John. You must admit your own, culpabilities and moralities. Can't you accept your life is nothing but death? And this kid's going, I want to go. This is boring. He's not kicking anyone. And so that's what I mean when I'm just sort of going like, or there's always somebody with the worst cough you've ever heard is somewhere in your theater.
Yeah, and we don't have like an Alamo Draft House around us
Yeah,
where it's like they do take it exceptionally
that
seriously there.
That's why I go to movies. Also, just because once again, no brag, but because I have my schedule affords me the ability. I'll go to a movie at like 11 in the morning. Although
Sure.
sometimes you get the old people who are just as bad as the kids.
Oh, if
Some
not worse, because they're constantly asking what's happening.
oh, what is that? Who is this now? What is this guy doing? Who's he? He's like, oh Jesus Christ, lady. My
But
God.
for every 8 of those, I feel like there
Yeah.
are 2, and maybe they're not even happening in the same year, but like
Yeah.
I'll always remember certain theater experiences
Yeah.
because they're indelibly ingrained in my head of a crowd of people all having a similar reaction to something. Whether
Oh,
that be
that.
the end of Infinity War where everyone's getting dusted and the crowd is just dead quiet,
Yeah.
or the end of Endgame, and not to do 2 Marvel movies back to back, but when the on your left moment happened, all the portals open and the
Yeah.
crowd is going ballistic.
No, that kind of stuff. I mean, I went to that advanced screen. I went to of Batman was all like DC nerds, and people were cheering and screaming, and that's awesome. I love that feeling because once again, we're all on the same wavelength.
Right.
But yes, 9 times out of 10, it's like there's a guy opening a wrapper, somebody
Sure.
dropped something, a kid's dumping popcorn over there. And you're like, Jesus Christ! Those are the moments when I go, why do I do this? I could just be at home. And not having to deal with this shit. So there are pros and cons to it. I do think I agree with the concept of the magic of the audience experience.
Sure.
Because
Okay.
in that opening, they do go like, "You're here seeing movies the way they were meant to be seen." I'm like, well, assuming you see it on a big enough screen with somebody who's actually calibrated the projector correctly and an audience who actually wants to watch the movie, then yes. Because like I said, too many times, and I'll put Regal on blast for this. Too many times, those Regal projectors are dark, man. I've run into this a lot.
It's something I was just reading an article about. I forget if it was on Polygon or where at, but they were talking about how, especially Regal theaters, they do so little to maintain the like quality of their projectors, and
Yes.
that they never really calibrate it to a specific film. They just keep it at like a base level setting. So when a filmmaker like uses a different sort of color ratioing,
Right.
basically,
Right.
to light their film, it can drastically change how it should be projected and like calibrated to do so. And a lot of the larger theaters never bother to worry about that. I mean, I do remember seeing The Batman in theaters and being like, wow, this is really like really dark, and maybe that's a stylistic choice, and then watching it at home being like, no, that was just a really shitty projector.
It is dark, but it's watchable. Yeah, exactly. It is that thing where yeah, if your movie is purposefully dark, now it becomes just dark on the screen.
Yeah, like
I
unwatchably dark.
I get ready for every time I go like here comes film snob going Paul Thomas Anderson. I heard him on a podcast the other week. I love PTA though. I'm whatever. He's a fucking genius. But he said something I think is very true and something I feel where he goes, I also agree with the magic of movie theaters, but movie theaters are doing nothing to entice me. They're doing that. They are not caring to worry about the sound or the picture. He goes, "You're not making a good case for me to leave the house." And I'm somebody who wants to see movies in theaters, but he's like, "It's gonna look better on my TV." That's on you.
Yeah. No.
And I think
And
that's true. We're sort of like, guys, if you want to survive as an industry, maybe some quality control would be nice.
and I want to loop back to our main topic here, because something I haven't really quite harped on is how good this movie looks.
Great. Yeah.
Between the fact that it is just like, I think, a very well shot movie. There are some really interesting shots in the film in
I love
terms
all
of like the actual camera movement.
the stuff with like the portal stuff where the camera's going vroom
Yeah.
into it. Very cool.
But on top of that, this is a movie that could so easily feel like it's floating in a vacuous sea of CG nothing. And they
Yeah.
go above and beyond in terms of creating practical, a lot of stuff. The fact that we saw practical animatronic and puppet work for like the dragon people and the cat people and the bird people, it felt like something from an older Jim Henson production that you just don't see in films today.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the movie does this thing, which I think we're seeing more and more of, which I really like, which is this, and what I've been saying for years, and what other film nerds have been saying for years, which is this battle between the digital and the practical. It's not mutually exclusive. The best movies find a way to merge the two, and by doing that, often those are the best looking movies. The fact that there are large amounts of CG in this movie, but there are also practical stuff, and how well they sit side by side. That's the stuff where I'm going, man, because a lot of this is green screen, but by choosing those moments to bring practical stuff in, it makes the CG seem more real because you're like, well, that's real, therefore I'm buying this as real versus this. I mean, it's something I think a lot of the modern Star Wars shows have been praised for, right?
Yeah.
The way that they merge those things, the sort of Favreau and Filoni era we're in over on that, is like, man, everything, because all that stuff is just shot on screens, but the fact that so much of it is real and in the frame
Yeah.
makes you buy all of the world so much more. It just,
I mean, you talk about the graveyard scene where they're digging up all the dead guys and asking them questions. The fact that so many of those corpses popping out of the gravestones looked practical, at least to
yeah,
me,
yeah,
was like an incredible devotion to A, the bit, which we got to commit to the bit, and B,
oh,
the just like artistry that goes into designing every individual smoldering corpse is like, That's fantastic. That's
It
amazing.
is,
That's
and the
art.
fact that, like I said, the fact that I can't tell if it's practical, digital, or it's probably some combination of the two.
Sure, yeah.
But the fact that I'm not seeing the seams and I'm enjoying the movie enough that I'm also not looking for them, that's best case scenario. Now, something I do want to talk about and kind of wrap this up is, as we've been talking about the theater experience and this movie and stuff, is how this movie's doing, which I know people are going, oh God, here comes the business thing. But we've been obsessed with movie box office for a long time on this show because, especially in the world right now, it's a crazy industry.
Right. And unfortunately, like we were saying at the top of the show, it's really, really impossible to detangle the art we love from the commerce side of things, because if
Well,
something makes money, that can means it can perpetuate itself.
and yeah, especially when we're talking about stuff that is franchise stuff, and this movie totally feels like it's. I think the movie strikes a good balance between, yeah, I want to see more of this, but also the movie isn't like, here comes the sequel, baby.
Yeah, they don't. I mean, the uber bad guy that they mention a couple of times is a character
Yeah,
named Zaz Tam, who's just like one of the what's called the BBEG in a D&D parlance, that just stands for
right.
Big Bad Evil Guy. Um,
Sure.
and he is like a quintessential big bad evil guy who's just like, yeah, yeah, super evil wizard guy off in the evil wizard place.
But we don't cut to him in a mid-credit scene going, I'm coming for you, thieves.
The joke that a friend of the show, Reed Morris, came up with is one of the big bad evil guys of D&D is a character named Vecna, who you might be familiar with if you watched the last season of
What are you talking
Stranger
about?
Things.
It reads out of his mind because Vecna is clearly the villain of Stranger Things.
In D&D terms,
Yeah.
Vecna is a character who famously is missing a hand and an eye, and those are two like artifacts out in the world that adventurers can find. Is the hand of Vecna and the eye of Vecna. And the post-credit scene of this movie would have been Vecna approaching his dismembered hand and going, "Fine, I'll take care of it myself," and
Yeah.
sliding his hand onto himself.
They did the smart, because Gorgone, how many fantasy movies have we been to that are like Aragon going, I have a dragon too, says John Malkovich, and you're like, you're never making a fucking another one of these.
Don't
And
don't
those are
don't bring
those are
Aragon into this, John.
but I mean,
Don't.
I feel like we've seen so many franchise starters, the golden combo. I feel like you and I in particular, I've been to many movies with you where it's been like, and it's always so embarrassing when you know in the moment going like, oh, you guys aren't going to get us. No, you guys really like, you're way too confident. This movie strikes that Star Wars and New Hope thing where it's like, it has an ending, but the threads are there to pick up. But it's a totally satisfying A to B to C experience
Yep,
as a movie.
exactly. Yeah,
And I
totally.
think that's the best way to do that, especially for something like this. Which leads us to, this movie's in a real weird place box office wise, because I read 38.5 million opening weekend, and I went, oh shit, uh-oh. And then everybody else is going like, maybe that's kind of good though, because I'm going like a franchise. But the thing is, there's nothing to compare this to, which works in this movie's favor. There's
Yeah.
no other Dungeons and Dragons movies, really. Sorry to the fan of the 2000 movie. That one guy, Jeremy.
Jeremy, the one guy.
The thing they're comparing it to is Uncharted, which made 44 million domestically, and that
Who's
was
doing this comparison?
a Hollywood Reporter.
Okay. Because, yeah, I'm just looking at Box Office Mojo, and I'm looking at the takes that they now have estimated from Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Yeah. So they're going, yeah, we're looking at 38.5 according to Hollywood Reporter, which is, just taking from the Paramount estimates. But apparently Paramount is happy with this. And like I said, the thing is, yeah, Uncharted made 44 million opening weekend, and that was deemed a success, and they're making a sequel to that. So, okay.
Yeah,
The movie
it
made
looks
another
like
33 overseas.
the budget for this film, the estimate I'm seeing is 150 million. Right now it's made 38.5 domestic, and its gross
Yeah.
worldwide is 71.5.
Yeah, that's what
And
I
that's
see here.
just in its opening weekend.
Yeah.
So it's probably going to make its money back unless the drop off is insane.
But the good thing is, and once again, it's always tough to judge word of mouth, but the movie received an A- cinema score. So that means the people who bothered to, that's always the thing I go, the people who came out of the theater where they were giving out cards and who actually bothered to fill out the cards generally liked it. The critics' reviews have been great.
Yeah.
So, I mean, word is good.
The
And
thing that I think is most promising about this is that it has a pretty clear runway in terms of like
yeah,
what's coming out from here on out.
well, kind of.
Kind of, but in terms of like what it actually has to compete with for the next couple of weeks,
Yeah.
the only thing I can see that actually is going to like take a big chunk out of this.
I'm indicating my mustache, and I'm doing this because of Mario.
Sure, Mario is coming, and nothing will stop the Mario juggernaut. But
Nothing
this
is.
that is undeniably like the big nerd family movie, right? But for like maybe older teens, early 20s who maybe aren't going to go out and see the Super Mario Bros movie, this could still be decent counter programming for that.
Sure. Yeah. The thing is, this one really is truly. I don't know. I'm really curious to see. But I think I want to bring this up in the point. I wanted to look at the numbers on this because they're going 38.5 million. They're going, hey, that's pretty good for opening weekend. Meanwhile, I keep reading industry things about why Ant-Man Quantumania is a failure, and that's made 471.8 million,
Right.
and that's considered a failure.
Because it's a Marvel movie that made less than a billion, and the box office math is completely broken because of Marvel scale these days.
That's what I'm saying. It's like the thing that's interesting is because there is nothing to compare. This is now like setting the barometer for Dungeons and Dragons. They're going like pretty good. We got people to go to. While a brand that certainly has a fan base and is a thing everybody's loosely familiar with, the Dungeons and Dragons game. I think in terms of it's still kind of a new pitch as a movie franchise, right? So they're going like, okay, we're kind of testing the waters with this one. Whereas, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm still mad about the Ant-Man thing because
Sure.
I'm like, in what world? The movie cost $200 million. It made 471.8. It more than doubled its budget. In what world is that a bomb?
Well, and that's reported budget because you never know in terms of like what they spent on merchandising and all that. But
Or what they made on merchandising though, too.
that's
'Cause
also
Toy Story-
true. Yeah, those MODOK plushies are selling like hotcakes.
Absolutely.
What I'm most curious about when it comes to the D&D movie and like the raw numbers of it all is the multiplier, right? Which for those who don't know is like how badly does this movie drop off in the following weeks? Because we've seen movies that like do okay their opening weekend and then effectively don't exist within 7 days.
It's a big change in box office, right? Because it used to be, people always talk about this. Back in the 80s, a movie would be number one at the box office for like 10 weeks.
Right.
You know, Ghostbusters would make a little bit of money every week and be the highest grossing movie of the year. But it didn't make all of its money up front. People would just keep going and going and going.
And the last movie I can think of that had anywhere close to that trend is Iron Man back in 2008.
Yeah, you know what kind of had it a little bit, although once again, we're in the weird pandemic thing, was Top Gun Maverick, actually, where that
Yeah.
like went to number 2, then went back up to number 1. You know, that kind of had that. But yeah, it is sort of that. Yeah, that Iron Man for sure had that though, where it just kept coming back around. People would go to it again and again and again. But we do live in this world now where it is like opening weekend, you've got to make the vast majority of your money opening weekend.
Right. But what I'm curious about with this film is whether or not word of mouth can sustain it for the following week and maybe into the Mario weekend. Obviously, I think the Mario is
That's the
probably
big
going to
question.
destroy like
The big question is how much of the audience is Mario going to take, right?
yeah. And I don't know. There are plenty of people who like don't want to see a Illumination Studios movie just on a baseline. And like there's plenty of people who are just like, ugh, animated films, no thank you. Regardless of the content.
I'm looking at an industry projection, right? So take from this what
That's
you will.
yeah, the big grain of salt there.
85 to 90 they're projecting for Mario.
Opening weekend or total?
That's opening weekend.
I mean, yeah, who knows? Maybe. I have no idea what that prediction is based on.
Get this, Gorgone, you can't believe it. The pick is tracking well with boys and girls under 12.
Shocking. You're saying the studio that made the Minions movie is pitching towards little kids?
But also, they talk about this also tracking well with self-identified gamers under 25.
Sure, and that's the thing is like you got the nostalgia play here, where Dungeons and Dragons has a much smaller percentage of that like
Yeah.
brand recognition. Everybody knows Mario. Everyone can go wahoo.
Yeah, that I mean, there's no question Mario will be number one next weekend. I think, like I said, the biggest thing is how much does it eat away at the Dungeons and Dragons crowd. I don't know. The thing is, we're coming into Easter weekend, so
Well, and you know, the Lord and Savior, when he rose, he really wanted to make sure that everyone was making their saving throws against Fireball. So that's Jesus saves, John, and when you do save, you take half damage.
so we'll see. I don't know. I'm curious. I mean, I've seen this. I'm sure I'll go see Mario, because sure. I mean, it looks actually. I mean, it's fun to joke about because it's big but it looks pretty good, really. I don't know. Those trailers look pretty solid.
Yeah,
I'm surprised.
I'm still not sold on Chris Pratt as
Man,
as
everybody's got to
Mario.
get Chris Pratt as Mario. I mean, it just is. I don't know.
I know. I'm just saying, in terms of my Hollywood Chris rankings, I'm gonna take Pine over Pratt any day of the week.
Yeah, I put Pine at number one. I think he's my favorite of the Chris's, but I do like Pratt.
Pratt's okay, but I think he's bottom of the barrel in terms of my favorite Chris's in Hollywood.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if I'd put him at the bottom, but I do. I mean, I like
Is he
my
above
Pine.
Hemsworth?
Ooh, that's a tough one. See, they're
Is
neck
he
and
above
neck.
Evans?
He's not above Evans. I'm a Pine and Evans.
That's four Chris's down right there.
I'm just saying. I mean, Pratt is a real. It's a real. We just need a movie star in this part. I don't know. I don't know about the having the guy from the games play it, because that would be. I
I'm
think
not
I
even
might.
saying that. I was just like, why?
Because I've met those people that would go, better be Charles Martinet. I'm like, that would. I'd have to shoot myself in the theater to.
That's like saying like, well, we better have Jaleel White as Sonic.
Yeah, that's sort of the thing where I'm like, yeah, I agree. It is Chris Pratt. I don't have an issue with it, but it's more just like, boy, you guys didn't put a whole lot of thought into that, did you?
Right. Like
It
it feels very low effort.
It's not even with Chris Pratt. It's just with that's just literally the first name that was on a list for anything, isn't it?
Right. Exactly.
Because I think all the other casting in that is much more clever. I mean,
I think
Charlie
there's some
Day
inspired casting in there.
I mean,
Yeah.
Charlie Day as Luigi. For whatever people don't like about Chris Pratt as Mario, Charlie Day as Luigi more than makes up for that. I think, which is so good. Jack Black as Bowser. Seth Rogen as Donkey Kong. Come on, man. That was born to him. Yeah, he was
You
born.
could have just taken off all of his clothes and given him a tie with DK on it, and I probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
Speaking of, did we talk about this already? I don't know if we did or not, but just because that reminds me, real quick before we go, did we talk about our thoughts on the Ninja Turtles trailer from Seth Rogen?
Oh, we haven't. I am super into it. It looks
I
like a
think
very
it looks
interesting
great.
art style, and I dig the vibe they're going for.
Yeah, the art style really got me too. It almost seems it's not exactly the same, but it seems to have some of the same thought behind it as the Spider-Verse stuff, where it's sort of creating this like digital but cell shaded with almost like comic book art lines in it.
It is trying. It's really funny to me that CG animation has kind of looped back around to get us to realize that no, 2D animation actually looks great and amazing, and we love it so much, but we've kind of had to like come full circle on that so that CG animation can now replicate what people love so much about sketchy, imperfect hand-drawn animation.
The same thing I feel about the Lego movies, where they basically went like, how do we use CG to make stop motion? Like,
Yeah, exactly.
so weird that we just keep going back to. Actually, that stuff looked amazing for a reason. Well, it does feel like CG got so good at replicating very real looking things that people go like, I kind of want cartoons to look like cartoons though.
Yeah, exactly.
And that I love the design of it. I love that they cast real teenagers as the turtles, which has never happened.
A novel idea, right?
A novel idea, but it immediately, as soon as they started talking, I'm like, oh my god, they sound like kids. They've never sounded like kids. It's great. I can't wait for John Cena and Seth Rogen as the voices of Bebop and Rocksteady. That's
yeah,
brilliant.
Very funny.
Jackie Chan as Splinter. Come on, man. That's what I need in my life.
Yeah.
It looks so much fun. And if you got a problem with Black April O'Neil, shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you, man. My thing is like, I go, what? She seemed to have red hair and a yellow coat. I'm satisfied.
Was she not reporting on the situation? I believe she
She
was.
did seem to be interviewing them and taking notes. Also, legitimately, talking about legitimately funny, that bit about ooze versus goo. Funny stuff,
It's
man.
ooze. It just rolls off the tongue better. Ooze.
Yeah, and Seth Rogen, man, he's just doing what we'd be doing with his money and clout by going, I'm just going to make stuff of all the comic books I like.
Sure. Yeah, no, and look, the fact that we're leaning into the mutant side of things, which is always like the fun part of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that some of the more mainstream versions of that property hasn't, is just like, no, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is really weird and really bizarre, and there's lots of
Especially,
animal people running around.
well, especially if you were kids like us who collected all the toys as kids, we know all the weird stuff. Oh, that's another thing. Giancarlo Esposito is the voice of Baxter Stockman. Yes, great choice. Yeah, I can't wait. I think that looks like a lot of fun. We'll probably talk about that on here when
Oh,
that
I'm
movie
sure.
comes.
Yeah.
I'm sure we will. God forbid, talking about the Ninja Turtles.
And there was
So
actually just an announcement that they're doing a large open world like action game based on Last Ronin, which I found very fascinating, like an Arkham
did hear about that.
City-esque game.
I am very excited about that because if you haven't read Last Ronin, man, what a cool entry in the Ninja Turtles canon.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's very much like the Dark Knight Returns of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles story.
the first time Eastman and Laird have done a story together in years.
Yeah.
I can't recommend that enough. It's so good. So we'll talk next month on the show when we get back to because just be back to the '70s next week on this show
Woohoo!
on the main show. Back to the '70s for a whole new story arc.
I'm sure it'll
Yay!
be fine.
I'm sure it'll be fine. And you know what's interesting? We recorded it. Oh no, I do remember it now. Okay, it's about pirates.
Yeah.
Do you guys like pirates? And do you think pirates should be in Star Wars? But not space pirates, like pirates.
But also, there are space pirates, because lest we forget, Crimson Jack is
Never
back,
forget
baby.
Crimson Jack. It's coming back. But we will, for the first time with this new format, we will be talking about Star Wars on this show next month, I believe. Am I correct in this? Will Mandalorian be? Yeah, it should be done by then.
You're the one with this calendar, John. I just know what I'm watching every week on Wednesdays.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing. Let me look this up because I think, should this work, I love people get to watch us schedule the podcast in real time.
Last episode of The Mandalorian debuts on April 19th, so yes.
Perfect. Okay. Then we will get to talk about the new season of Mandalorian and the new season of Picard. We're going to check in on both star shows next month on Panel Up.
We will defy the basic convention that those two things must forever be in opposition to each other and unite them finally in audio form.
Trek and Wars together. And I promise I will try not to cry like I do every week when I watch Picard because it is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Boy, it's embarrassing over here sometimes.
Sometimes?
A lot of the time, yeah. Thank God I live alone because sometimes I'm just like Geordie LaForge. But yes, that's good. As mentioned, we do have lots of other content over on our Patreon page, which is patreon.podbean.com/punchup. We also have content at new levels now. That's right. For just $5 a month, you can get the Kolchak the Night Stalker rewatch podcast, which is called Nights Talking. If you want to hear Brendan Jones and I go through every episode, and by that I mean all 20 of them, of Kolchak the Night Stalker. It's a brief miniseries.
Not doing the remake show?
Oh, I tried. Somebody put the kibosh on that and said I will not watch that. And fair enough. It really isn't a thing. It really isn't anything to do with the old show, hardly.
No.
But whatever. I wanted to do it, but but anyway, we still have plenty more weeks of that ahead on over there. And at the $10 level, there's a new weekly show called The Last to Be Curious that just started, which is a reaction show to franchise films, and the first series of that will be about, much like the title suggests, Brendan Jones and Michael Listman watching the Fast and Furious movies, aka the Fast Saga.
And I believe you've already started in on that, right? Like
We've already started. We've recorded the first 6 episodes, and it's coming out weekly. So I think the second episode will be coming out just as this is
Can,
as this.
can you give me a brief, like, what were their first glancing reactions to those early Halcyon days of the family?
You know, they are at the moment having trouble with some of the appeal of it. It feels a little dated early on.
Oh
Now,
no, really?
yeah, there's a lot of
When they're
2000.
stealing TV VCR combos.
I will say, like most people, as a little preview, they start to have more fun as the movies get more cartoonish. So
Yeah.
at a certain point, and I did, based on listener demand, we are doing Tokyo Drift,
Yes.
but we are doing it in its place chronologically, story-wise, not release,
Okay.
which is actually very interesting to do because it's hilarious to think that movie is pretending not to be taking place in the mid 2000s.
Because
You're like, wait, why did
chronologically, it would be taking place in like 2015 or something.
Yeah, and yet everybody's got like flip phones and stuff. You're like,
Yeah.
wait a minute. And also particularly funny to watch that and Furious 7 and watch Lucas Black age 10 years in supposedly a scene that takes place right after the end of Tokyo Drift. Very funny. Very fun. So, yes, folks, there will be a Tokyo Drift reaction. And also, spoilers on that. They didn't like that one.
Turns out a lot of people didn't.
It's not good, you guys. I know there are Tokyo Drift fans out there, but I'm sorry. It's really not very good.
It had one salvageable character.
It had one. They took the only thing that worked about it and put him in the other movies. So yeah. So yeah, check all that out. That's at the $10 level. And then plenty of other stuff from Material Components also on there. And also, you also get early access to episodes of Campbell and Jones Meet the Monsters,
as well as all the episodes of commentary that you do for the Action Shelf for good action films.
For good action films, and you can also get the whole back catalog of our Incredible Hulk show that we did.
Absolutely.
And all the classic Panel Up episodes are also on there. So lots of fun stuff to be had over on the Patreon page. And make sure you visit us online. We're at May the Panel on Twitter and Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
And check out all the other Punch Up Entertainment shows that we've talked about. They're all a lot of fun. They're all equally good.
And if you're watching us on YouTube, of course, one of the best ways to help out is hit subscribe, hit like, comment below. What were your favorite like little Easter eggs in the D&D movie? I didn't talk about a lot of them, but like, yes, there were definitely a ton of moments where I was pointing at the screen going, that's an Axe Beak, that's a Intellect Devourer, that's a Gelatinous Cube. I know these things.
The Gelatinous Cube I knew. All right, but that's going to do it for this month's episode of Panel Up. We'll be back to our normal Star Wars format next week. But I've been John Campbell.
And I will always be Mike Gorgone.
Till next month, we're going to panel down.